We're going to restore America as a major shipbuilding power. We're going to ensure the USA is the most powerful fleet anywhere in the world and long into the future.
What I've learned is that not only is the president's idea a good one, it's something that Navy desperately needs and now has a formal requirement for. The future Trump-class battleship, the USS Defiant, will be the largest, deadliest, and most versatile and best-looking warship anywhere on the world's oceans.
President Trump and the Navy Secretary, flanked by the Secretary of War and the Secretary of State, announcing this new fleet of battleships, the Golden Fleet, the president calls it, and they have some pictures of the Trump class of battleship that will be built in the U.S., a number of them to begin, and they're going to try to get up to 20. This comes, obviously, as there's a lot of focus on what is happening around the country of Venezuela and the buildup in the military and the naval force outside Venezuela. The president asked about that, and specifically the leader there, Maduro, and how he's taking all of this.
He can do whatever he wants. I mean, we have a massive armada formed, the biggest we've ever had, and by far the biggest we've ever had in South America. He can do whatever he wants. It's all right. Whatever he wants to do. If he wants to do something, if he plays tough, it'll be the last time he's ever able to play tough.
President Trump today. Let's bring in our panel, Real Clear Politics White House correspondent Philip Wegman, Fox News contributor Molly Hemingway, and Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams. Phil, there's a sense that this is a buildup. Obviously, we've seen the naval assets swarm around Venezuela, but continually the president has mentioned doing something on land to stop the drugs coming from Venezuela. Is there a sense that this is escalating?
There's a tremendous amount of momentum building here, not just for the naval strikes, but the president has said on numerous occasions that land would be next. And at this point, I don't know who is more bold or perhaps foolhardy, the captain of that Venezuelan oil tanker that's trying to run away from the U.S. Navy, or Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who continues to defy Donald Trump. In both cases, it's kind of a bold strategy. We'll see how it works out, but Trump has shown in the U.S., he has the political capital to keep doing this without a declaration of war. And obviously, on the military front, he has overwhelming force. So calling his bluff seems to be rather short-sighted.
Yeah, Molly, obviously, lawmakers on both sides weighing in on the situation. Take a listen.
When you see a boat that has drugs on it, you don't just bomb it. Maybe you get on the boat and you arrest everyone on it, question them. They're now seizing oil tankers, which has nothing to do with drugs.
These are sanctioned boats. This is consistent with international law, and this is the primary source of income for Venezuela. So I think this is consistent with what the president said, consistent with America's interest.
Molly?
President Trump has shown an interest in focusing more on a sphere of influence of this hemisphere as it relates to other countries. Venezuela has very close ties to China, to Russia, to Iran. These boats transporting oil are part of a larger picture, but one that interests President Trump because of his belief that he needs to kind of make sure things are going well in this hemisphere. It's also true that, land strikes or even the bold actions that have been taken thus far in terms of a blockade or some of the attacks that have happened thus far are one thing. I don't know about the American people supporting a full-on land invasion, which would be something different. But President Trump has shown a unique foreign policy where he says something, he expects people to take it seriously, but he's not invested in super long wars to carry out undetermined policy goals.
Yeah, and to Phil's point, Juan, Reuters, the U.S. pursuing third oil tanker near Venezuela, and they are in international waters. Officials telling Reuters that in what would be the second such operation this weekend, third in less than 2 weeks, and that is continuing as we speak. It does seem like there is a bolder or a broader sense here, not just the drug boats, but maybe also influence, to Molly's point, in the region from China and others.
I think so. And also we've heard that Cuba may be suffering because they are reliant on so much financial support, including oil, coming from Venezuela. So it may have some kind of domino effect in taking down some governments that have never been popular in the U.S. But I think on a larger scale, I would go back to the question being raised here, which is this a war of necessity or is this a war of choice? Today, I think a lot of people wondered if the president was going to announce that we were going to war. And if that's the case, then exactly why? And how much of a commitment do we have? I don't think there's any question, as we heard from my colleagues here tonight, that the United States has a superior military power. That ship that's running away can run. It's not going to get away. And Maduro can do whatever he wants. As President Trump said, he'll be defeated. But then are we on the hook for how much money? Are we going to put people on the ground to fight? I just don't think it's that Venezuela is an American national security priority. And I just think we have to think through, why are we there and what is going on? The president has not articulated that yet.
Meantime, today the president was asked again about the Epstein files and the pictures that are coming out. What has not come out yet, Phil? It's still a question that he gets and has been a focus over the weekend. Here's what he said about the pictures of former President Clinton.
Look, I like Bill Clinton. I've always gotten along with Bill Clinton. I've been nice to him. He's been nice to me. We've always gotten along. Respect him. I hate to see photos come out of him, but this is what the Democrats, mostly Democrats, and a couple of bad Republicans are asking for.
But here's Rand Paul in what he's calling the partial release here. We don't have that soundbite, but he's basically saying the administration, Phil, has struggled for months with putting out all of these, in part, months and months. The suggestion would be just give out all the information and release it all. Where is the White House tonight?
Well, it's difficult to get a passing grade when you turn in your work late, and by law, they were supposed to release all of the information already. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says that they are complying with the law, trying to ensure that no victims are pictured, and also with this court ruling out of the Southern District of New York. I think that the public would likely give the White House more grace if the president had not flip-flopped on this issue, and if Attorney General Pam Bondi hadn't made some of those misleading statements earlier in the year. But you have the right, who wants to see Democratic politicians embarrassed, and you have the left, who is accusing the White House of cherry-picking some of this information. While we wait for all of the files to be released, there's more than 200 reporters going through it, working 24/7. So we'll have to wait and see until we see the entirety.
Molly?
Well, people want information, and the reason why it's dangerous to do that is because you get some information without context, or people can be accused of wrongdoing when no actual wrongdoing was taking place. But as long as the administration gets out these photos as required by law now, I just think people should understand that there are going to be questions that won't be answered even with a full release of photos.
I got 15 seconds, Juan.
Well, I think, it reminds me, I think what did Nixon say? Drip, 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 limited hangout. But right now, the drip, drip, drip is just making people angry, both sides, as Phil said.
All right. We'll continue to follow it. Thank you all.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.